an abstracted version of Lone Peak, and it's still Lone Peak. Like, you know, I've seen people for like different things, like draw a triangle and it's like, oh, that's Lone Peak. Okay, so I'm gonna, just to prove a point, use this big brush just to show you that I can, or anyone can, not just like me, but you can create a thin line with a big brush. It has to be the right big brush, but it can be done. So how can I do this so you can see it? I'm gonna hide my paint a little. There we go. Okay, so I put it over, put the picture on the left side because I'm right-handed. Okay, so I'm gonna, whatever makes sense to you and wherever you want it to be, think about your composition. So if you start really close to the top, you're gonna have mostly mountain, not a lot of sky, and mostly a lot of the trees. If you start really low down, you're gonna have a bunch of sky. If you start in the middle, then you'll have kind of a balance of both, but it doesn't, starting in the middle is not necessarily the right thing to do, just something to think about. I'm gonna start here, and I'm just gonna kind of like line up what I see on the mountain with what I paint here, and just okay. And I can adjust it. So this is obviously like a rough, kind of a rough draft. It's fine if it's not exact, because this is actually going to get painted over pretty early in the game. I'm just doing a little bit of lines, I guess, to indicate where some stuff is. I'm not going too crazy with detail. There's just no reason to do the detail at this point, because everything here is going to kind of disappear. But anything that's like, oh, I need to remember, like, oh, like these trees are here, even though these trees are not blue, I just want to remember them. So I'm gonna kind of fill in where those trees are. That's kind of going off. My proportions are a little weird, but not too worried about that. Okay. So yeah, so there's my Lone Peak. I'm feeling like the shape on the top could be a little pointier. Lone Peak is super pointy, triangle mountain. So I might adjust that a bit once we're painting more, but that's good enough for me to start with, I think. The rocks over here. Okay, so there's my Lone Peak to start with, and that is my underpainting. So you want a good idea of where things are. Does not need to be perfect. It's kind of interesting looking at the screen after, because I'm like, oh wait, something looks like not quite right. If I want to delete something, there's a couple ways I can do that. Like, I don't know if it'll work right now because I let that dry. But if I wanted to get rid of this line, like if it was going to annoy me, I could just get it wet and kind of dab it away. Obviously, it's not like a perfect solution. You can do that though. If you make a more, something that you really want to get rid of, acrylic paint is great because you just wait 5 minutes and it's probably going to be all the way dry, and then you just paint over it and it's gone forever. So the things that are a little proportionately off, like the peak, to me, I want it like more over on this over here. I'll just paint over it when this is dry. Okay, any questions? All right, I don't hear anyone, so I'm gonna keep going. So that's your underpainting. If I go too fast, just holler at me and I will slow down. All right, so my next step, according to my little plan here, which this plan is a pretty, it's a good process, step-by-step process for painting a landscape. Underpainting is kind of just you're laying out your idea. But then as far as the order in which you paint things, starting with the background, moving to the middle ground. So the stuff like in middle range, like you know, like maybe in this picture, you can kind of see the trees. Maybe these, like the Challenger area is closer to you. So stuff in that middle range, doing that second is good. And the stuff that's closest to you, so in this photo, the trees, you could also kind of think of, you know, this like middle band of trees is someplace between middle ground and foreground. But going in that order, starting in the back and moving forward, is a good move for a couple reasons. Reason one is the layers of the paint will actually in some way be visible. So they'll layer on top of each other. So if I start with the foreground front stuff, and then I paint the background behind it, that paint in the background is going to be physically on top of the paint that makes the picture in the front, and your eye will read that. Your eye will be like, oh, the paint, like something's weird. It's like bumped up, but the background, the back is in the front. I can't explain it, but it's like, you can see it. You can tell that where the paint is, and it makes a difference. The other reason is that you tend to have more detail visible in the front, and it's best to paint that last, because then you don't have to paint around the details while you're painting like a big space. So big to small, basically, and back to front. Details, going on the same line of thought, I always do, I think most people do details last, mostly for that reason, that if you paint a detail, like let's say I paint a really detailed tree, I don't want to have to paint around the edges of the tree with the background color. Maybe I do, but in most cases I don't. If I can paint the background color and then paint the tree kind of like on top, it's like way easier. It's just difficult to paint around. Like if you painted an eye and you painted the eyelashes first and then had to paint the skin around the eyelashes, just imagine imagine that. It's difficult to do that in that order. So that's my spiel on that. All right, I'm gonna set this guy off to the side for just a sec and do some mixing of paint to get ready to paint the sky. So background, to me, in a landscape, the sky is the first level of background. It's the furthest away thing. It's the atmosphere, so can't really get further away than that. So I always paint the sky first, and I recommend people also do, but you know, it's art. You really could be doing this any way you want. Okay, so I used this, I think I used this blue, cerulean blue, which is it really is a sky blue, but it's almost like too much a sky blue. So definitely breaking it down with some white is great. You will use a bunch of, obviously this painting, especially because it is a winter scene, you will use a lot of white in it, but almost any painting, you'll use white the most first, just because you use white a lot to dilute colors more than you realize. When I was teaching high school, like the first couple years, I would, like throughout the year, I'd have to just keep ordering gallons and gallons and gallons of white paint. And I was like, how is this happening? Why is it just white? And then I realized you just use it a lot. So I just have the white and the cerulean blue. The colors are a little different on screen than they are like in front of me. But if you wanted to do a little experimenting and try different, just like adding in little different bits of blue to kind of see how things change, that's a good thing to do. Is this going to come out? This is actually a really similar color. So if I, you know, I can just mess around with it. A good little trick for mixing paint, if you do have a palette knife, I don't even actually like have one here. I don't know where it went, but a palette knife is kind of nice because then you're not just like getting paint all over your paintbrush. Paintbrush obviously works fine. It is nice to kind of corral your paint and not fill your palette or paint plate immediately, because you do want to save some space for other stuff. This, I actually kind of took a lot of room here. But yeah, just kind of mixing it so it's not marbled is good, and mixing enough so that you will not run out. It's really kind of hard to duplicate the same exact color twice. So if you run out halfway through painting the sky and then you have to make it again, you kind of will have to do a little blending, which we'll talk about. Blending is not a bad thing, but you know, you might want to, you want to be able to cover a space. Okay, I'm going to do something else with that blue in a sec. So anyway, I'm going to start off just filling, and my paper is probably going to warp a little bit because it is paper. A canvas would not be warping, but yeah, you can kind of notice it's like bowed a little bit. Fine. Okay, so yeah, so I'm going to start to fill in my space. I have this big boy paintbrush. It's just large, it's a large paintbrush. So it's really filling in that space very quickly. If I was going for time, so I'm going to kind of start to fix the shape that I don't like. I'm just making that a little taller, the mountain a little taller, so I'm leaving that open. I will switch paintbrushes to a smaller one. I'm sad my paintbrush that I like to use is kind of not functional right now. I'm gonna see if I have a similar one. Looking in my little paintbrush pile here. I always end up buying kind of like the same paintbrush over and over and then ruining them. I'm not a good paintbrush maintenance person. I went to the Georgia O'Keeffe museum in Santa Fe, and they had some of her paintbrushes there that were like 100 years old and they were in perfect condition. I was like, that's interesting that she could do that. And I can't keep them for like one whole painting. All right. I'll use this little flat brush. Okay, so just to make a point, littler brush, taking up much more, taking more time to fill in the space. So I'm using this one super flat color. If I wanted to get a little more creative with it, I could have this another blue kind of like chilling out on the side here. This is like a super bright blue. You'll notice that is very strong blue too, holy moly. You'll notice some colors really pack a punch. Like I had just used such a small amount of this and look at how different it is. And it's very, very, very cool. It's almost kind of like aqua-y when I'm looking at it. Yeah, so just be aware of that. Some colors are very strong and can really overpower anything else you have going on. As far as mixing goes, like you kind of get a feel for it, especially with oil paint. Oil paints are a little more consistent in their colors, I think. Like what a color is will be very similar. But anyway, so if I wanted to have more of that impressionist kind of look, or if I just wanted to build some more texture into something that is typically kind of a flat color like the sky, I could, I don't know how visible that is. It might be a little bit of a glare. I could, maybe I'll do it a little darker just to make it dramatic so you can see. I could be using, you know, a paintbrush and alternating between colors and creating this texture. Oh, I started to paint over the mountain. That's okay. So that's a mistake I just made. Like this right here is the mountain. I was kind of thinking about the color and not what I was painting. So I could go like that and wipe it off really quick. Most likely I would just leave it and remember that I need to fix it when I go back and paint the mountain. So like you can paint outside the lines and nothing bad will happen. You can fix it. Okay, so yeah, so I can create some texture by using two very, very similar shades, but just kind of rotating in and out. So that gives me more of a little flow. The other thing, since it is a sky, I can be doing a similar thing with white. So I am doing something that some art teachers might like slap the paintbrush out of your hand for. I am just using the same paintbrush because I want it to all be in this like really similar colors. I don't want like a stark difference. So I am using the same paintbrush and picking up slightly different colors and plopping them in. If I wanted a very stark difference, I did not want the colors to be the same. Two things I would do different. I would use a different paintbrush, or I would clean the paintbrush in between. The other thing that's even more important is I would actually just wait for the color underneath to dry, because anytime you're putting wet paint on top of wet paint, you're gonna see a blending. So if you want it to blend, the paint, like slap that paint on top while the other color's still wet. If you don't want to see blending, wait until the first color is dry. And the nice thing about acrylics is they dry very quick. So like most of this is getting close to dry on mine anyway. And I did add a lot of water, which will slow it down a teensy bit, but not a whole lot. Okay, so I'm kind of doing like a big brush strokes visible. They have a certain geometric look to them because of this paintbrush. If I was using this paintbrush that I kind of messed up with the rounder edges, I would have a much softer finish. Or if I had a really soft paintbrush, it would kind of get rid of those lines. So play with it, make it look the way you want, and know that your paintbrush makes a difference. I don't know which one I like better. I kind of like the having that little bit of geometry in there. It's a little different. So I'm going to do that, but you do whatever. Okay. Everyone's still there? I'm going to switch to just looking. Is everyone's still good? Very quiet. Okay. Looks like people are working. So we'll go back to screen share. Okay. So yeah, so we can just continue painting in our sky. Depending on the size of your canvas, you might be done. I'm definitely taking longer than I need to. So I'll get moving here. If you're not done, obviously that's fine. I'm not done either. I'm gonna do another thing with this darker color. I'm gonna make the top of squidge darker. I don't know if I'm imagining it. I kind of feel like it is a little darker in the picture. I don't know, just for a little variety. And I'm doing the same sort of thing where I'm bringing the color down into the rest of the painting, or the rest of the sky portion, and kind of trying to get it to blend, not blend in the sense that it all becomes one color, but blend in the sense that there's some unity and it's not just like a sudden color change. That's just what I'm thinking as I'm doing this. Is like, I kind of noticed it was like, oh, that's like a block of dark blue. I don't want it to be a block. I want it to work together with the other colors that are in there. So just popping some of that dark color down here helps make that happen. And it's super easy to do this blending with blues and whites because they just naturally blend. You don't have to think about like, where is this on the color wheel and will it blend or will it contrast? I don't know. So it's a good place to start to get a feel for it. Okay, so let's see. I like that. I think that's kind of fun. I could keep going all day and just keep messing with it, but something, and this will probably come up a little bit more later, there is such a thing as like overdoing it and overworking. I am kind of like notorious overworker of paintings. That's basically when you just like, you're never quite satisfied and you just keep doing it and doing it and doing it to your detriment. There's a point where you just have to like move on. And you can't always move on and then kind of look at an area where you weren't happy with it, but like go do something else and then come back to it, and then you'll have a fresh perspective. Okay, so, but I'm actually I like this guy. I think it's kind of cool. All right, so there's that. No, I don't like that. Okay. No, see, I did it. I overworked it and then I messed it up. It's not messed up. It's okay. But I did the thing I was saying not to do. I just kept going and then I did something that made me unhappy with it. Okay, now I'm really going to stop with the sky. Okay, so the next step is going to be the mountain. So this, like the mountain as in Lone Peak, I am going to really use white to start with. And then what I'm going to be doing is building in a little bit of the shadows. Light to dark works. I said this in the last class too, totally different project, but it's a lot easier to make things look gradually darker than it is to lighten things. Not quite so critical with painting. Like I mean, literally could just paint it over and start over if you needed to anytime. But it is, I like to build light to dark personally, kind of the same thing. Some people do it different, but that's how I like to do it. And for a snow thing, it works pretty well. So I have the painting itself set to the side. I'm gonna let it dry a little bit. Ideally, I would like kind of let it dry all the way because I don't want the edges to blend. I don't want the edge of the mountain to blend into the sky. It might a little bit just because of our time needs. Shouldn't be too bad though. I'm gonna let it dry. Okay, so while it's drying a little bit, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna mix a few colors for the mountain itself. So I totally could actually just keep using the same blues, but I do want it to be a little different. I don't want it to be like exactly the same colors because it might get visually confusing. It might be really cool though to have just like a really, really limited color palette and just use blue and white. But I'm going to use a separate area and have a little white available for my mixing. Then have a little bit of black available. I'm going to use way more white than black. And since I already have this blue out, I'm going to just leave the blue available. If you ran out of blue, you can just squirt out a little bit more. So I'm starting to, I should have been more mindful to start with. Ooh, this does not want to screw back on. It's okay. I'm going to start to be organized with how I am mixing my paint. I got a little wild over here, but I'm going to show you the proper way to do it. Probably going to need more white, so I'm going to grab more white. Might as well be realistic about how much white I need. Okay, so I'm going to mix paint in a proper fashion now instead of willy-nilly. So I'm cleaning that same paintbrush that I use. Like I said, just the way I end up doing it, I kind of just use like the same paintbrush over and over. All right, so I'm going to use it to mix. If you have a palette knife, you could also be using a palette knife. I'm going to kind of mix the paint as if I were using a palette knife. So I'm going to start off by creating a light gray. So I've just picked up a little bit of white and I just picked up a little bit of the black, not a lot of black. Maybe even grab more than I will want. And then instead of swirling it around like a crazy person or like a 5-year-old, like I did up there, I'm just in the same area. I'm kind of picking the paint up like it's like with a spatula and then putting it back down and then smoothing it out. So this is what you would do if you had someone, if you were taking like an art workshop or were in a studio class, that's probably how you would be taught to do it with a palette knife. You can do it the same way with a paintbrush. It's just, your paintbrush is getting messy. So there's my light gray. So next thing I'm going to show you, I'm going to wipe my paintbrush off in between. I don't want to necessarily be mixing the same. I don't want to be over blending each color because then they'll just be the same and kind of turn muddy. If I wanted a even lighter gray, which I think I potentially might, I could just snag a little bit and mix it in with more white. Oop, hi cat. I got a cat on my lap. You're not really helpful, buddy. Sorry, I'm gonna move you. He wants to help. He's not helpful. Goodbye. Oh my God, get down. Okay. Okay, so I'm just making it a little lighter gray. And so what I'm doing is I'm giving each color its own little pile. And ideally, I'll keep them separated. So as you may be able to tell, this is not exactly how I end up doing it in real life. It just gets messier for me, but having a little bit of a semblance of organization is helpful. Like this is a do as I say, not as I do scenario for me. But yeah, same thing. So I'm making another gray, picking it up, putting it back down, and just gradually getting darker and darker. If I wanted my grays to have a bit more of a cool tone to them, I could pick up a smidge of blue. And like I said, that blue that I use, what is it called? Oh boy, Phthalo Cyanzine. That's, yeah. That's very, that's a name. So I could be plopping a little blue in there to create a bit of a cool tone. So I did a little bit of blue in that one, just like, I mean, it's hardly noticeable, but it can be nice to have a little bit of a color mixed in instead of pure black and white. Okay, so then I'll do another gray. I'm gonna just do 4 levels of gray. I think that'll be enough. Hopefully I've made a good enough quantity. So this right here is the kind of thing where if you don't make enough and you end up needing more, it could be a little irritating to try to replicate the same exact color again. Not a huge deal, but if you're like only making a teeny tiny little itty bitty bit and you have a really big canvas, maybe make more of that same color before you start painting. Like I might run out, but I'm gonna be okay. I'll figure it out. Okay, so there's my 4 colors of gray. I'm really going to be using those for the shading. This photo is it is like very white. A lot of it is pretty close to pure white. So I'll probably need more. Oops, I splashed some paint or water. Probably be using more of a pure white than a gray. So I'm cleaning my paintbrush. Since I'm going to be going in with white first, I'm cleaning it pretty well. So the way to know if it's clean is if you are cleaning it and you still see color coming out, it's not clean. So I don't think you can see that, but there's actually even a little blue. So it's like, I did not really clean it very well. Okay, so make sure it's clean, especially, it would be more important if, say I was like had red, say if I was just mixing red and I was gonna go paint something in white, it would be more important because like a red is really gonna show up. I'm gonna be painting something in the same color family. So it's not quite as crucial. All right, so let me think about how I can lay this out so people can see everything. Okay, I'm gonna set this over here so you can just see my grays. Set that guy there. Okay, so now my paint on my paper, it's pretty dry. There's some spots that are still wet. Most of them are up in the top and where the paint was super thick. So that like this kind of cloud that I did a little later is still a little wet, but I think it's dry enough that I can start to do my next step. So I've definitely painted well over the line of the mountain, which is fine. It's helpful because then I won't have a weird gap in between. So I'm gonna start with white. I'm gonna start with white and I'm gonna kind of do the outline of the mountain again. If my paint on this in the sky is still wet, it is gonna blend a little bit, not the end of the world, just something to be aware of. And so for my underpainting, I was really loose. For this, I'm gonna pay a little bit closer attention. All right, so let's put some paint on. Nothing to be afraid of, because if you make a crazy error that you hate, you can always fix it. So I'm adding that paint. A good little kind of trick that seems kind of backwards is that the more paint you have on your brush, I have kind of a good blob on there, not a blob, but like a lot kind of, the smoother your paint will go on. Your paint will start to, if you start to run out on your brush, your paint will go on really scratchy and kind of like jittery. And if you have a good amount, a lot of paint, it'll go on really smooth. So it's almost kind of backwards. Like you'd think if you're doing something really detailed and you wanted it to be smooth, you'd have less paint. Not the case. Opposite is true. Okay, so there's that little portion. That is the purest white portion, like that. I guess it's marks, London marks, like that zone. That's super duper white. So I'll go over that again to make it more white, but I just started with that. To me, it looked like an easy place to start. I am actually going to do the whole ridge pretty similarly. Something that I have going on right now, which you probably can't see, is since I used a lot of paint, it's kind of like created like a ridge. I don't think you can see it, but if you're doing it on your own, you can notice like the paint's actually bumped up. I'm going to smooth it out a little bit. I'm not adding so much paint right there that I'm deleting that underneath under painting. I can still see that a little bit, and if it does disappear, it's okay because it's going to disappear anyway. Okay, so anyway, I'm going to fill in this little area, and I'm really trying to pay attention to the proportions here. So my underpainting is going to start to disappear a little bit more and more. So I'm filling it in, smoothing it out. There's not an, so this is where my paint, the blue paint's a little wet, it might show up. That's not too bad. Okay. So just blending it in, going down. That's all going to get filled in more later, but just so I don't have like a weird like lump of paint. Just making sure I don't leave paint chunks. Okay, so now I'm going to start working, and the order that I'm doing this is not the necessarily the order in which you should do it or need to do it. You do it however you want. Okay. So I noticed that this is like, I want this to be a little peakier, like even pointier at the top. So I'm building that up a little higher. Yeah, okay. That looks better to me already. Lone Peak is like extremely triangular for a mountain, like a real actual mountain. Okay, so now I'm gonna just start moving over to the other side where it is a shadow, and the shadow is not gonna obviously show up until I paint it there, but I'm gonna try to just like replicate the shape of the ridge in white first. So there's that, there's where it dips down a little bit, like the big. And I haven't actually skied, I have not skied at Big Sky at all this year. I've been skiing at Bridger this year, but I'm going to Big Sky tomorrow we're having a work ski day, which will be fun. And I think it's actually gonna, seems like there's some snow now, so that's good. Okay, so I'm just kind of working my way down. I'll show you, if I want the edge to be kind of jaggedy, I can just like actually do, might be hard to tell because it's kind of far away, a jagged motion with my paintbrush, and it will help create that. So the smoother your the brush stroke is, like how you're moving the paintbrush, the smoother the line will be, and then the less smooth, the more jagged it will be. Okay, there's that. Smooth that out a little bit. Okay. All right, that looks pretty good to me. So now what I'll do is I'm going to start to do some blocking in of the shades. So I'm still primarily working this section. So basically like the Alto Ridge, and then like the, I don't, what do you call this ridge? I don't even know, like where the big is and stuff, where it goes to the A to Z's. So I'm going to be working this zone. I'm not going to start really doing this Challenger area, and I'm not going to start doing this tree stuff until later. So really just this top zone. Okay, so I am going to be starting to use my shades. I'm just going to, for now, start with white. I'm going to go back in and do one more layer on this really bright white section just to kind of fill it in. And since I have used so much texture in the sky, it makes sense to me to continue to use a similar amount of texture. The texture for me is not showing up as much in this white because it's such a pure white. It's not really there, but if I wanted to just like take some creative liberties and create some texture, I can grab a little bit, you might not be able to see because it's so light, but grab a little bit of that lightest gray and pop it in there just to have the texture match. Okay, so I'm gonna move on to this section here. So like the gullies right there. And I'm actually gonna use my lightest gray So the first, this, it's almost indistinguishable from white. You might not even be able to tell, but I'm going to use that lightest gray to fill in that space.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks.
I'm going to use the second lightest gray. Just, I think that it will be a little, yeah, that's a little easier for you to see. So I'm filling that in, and I'm filling it in following what I think is kind of the ridge line, all the way to about there. And so my underpainting, I have that ridge line kind of ending here. When I really look at it, it's a little, to me, just the way things are lining up on my picture, my painting, it's a little bit more of this over here. So I'm pulling it down there, and then I'm gonna start to just fill that in as it's kind of like its own little space. So I'm using those big paintbrush strokes again, like big chunky strokes, not being super careful because I like that texture. If I don't like that texture, I can be more gentle and fill it in softly, like kind of like what I'm doing. But I like the texture, so I'm chunking it in. Okay, so there's that. And there's a little bit of that blue from underneath kind of just popping through. I can always just kind of layer on some more of the white and gray to make that go bye-bye. So over here, things start to get a little darker, okay? So I'm gonna go, and they're a little bit bluey to me. They look a little blue. So I'm gonna, with my third darkest or third lightest, this third gray that I made, I'm gonna add a little blue to it because I like that blue tone. I want it to be a little bit more visible than what I did. So you don't need to do this, but if you want to, go for it. Yee, too blue. Ah, too blue, too much blue. Mixing paint, especially oil paint, for some reason is like super satisfying. And the more you do it, the more interesting it is, because you actually, this painting's not a great example, but you do some really weird color combinations to create specific colors. It's kind of fun. So that's okay. So I'm going to use that to start to do this shadow area. And as you see, this is quite a bit darker, and that is definitely okay, but I just want to be aware of how things are blending together and if they're blending in a way that I like, or if I want to mess around with it a little bit. So so far I'm okay with it. But if I started to do it and I like kind of looked at it from a distance and didn't like it, I would stop and think about what is happening, what can I do differently. It's always good to kind of stop yourself before you get too deep in, because you can always kind of adjust your approach. So anyway, I want the shade to go right up to the edge of the ridge. So I am starting at the very edge of the ridge and then pulling that shade down. And I'm gonna go right up to where I imagine this kind of drastic color changes or shade change, and use that color there. So you might notice that I've kind of changed the direction of my brush stroke as I'm working on this part of the mountain compared to when I was working in the sky and compared to when I was working on this really bright white spot. So when I was working in the sky, I was going kind of like left to right mostly. And when I was working on this, I was going kind of this diagonal direction. When I'm working on this section, I'm following the curve of the mountain. And so that is helping these active brush strokes make sense. They are active, but they're going in kind of like the right direction. If they were going in a different direction, could be cool, something worth experimenting with, but they might start to be confusing for the viewer. Like if I started to just go this way, I wouldn't get that feeling of like, this is the way that the mountain flows.
Yes, you did.
Okay.
What's doing?
So
I'm teaching a painting class in acrylic, which I've never tried before.
not sure. We can, whoever is talking, we can hear you, which is fine. But just so you know, I like the talking though. So I just started to do something and I didn't explain what I was doing, so I better explain. So I got my darkest gray that I made, not the black, but the darkest gray. I'm in this like the darkest zone here. So I'm using that dark gray in the darkest zone, but I'm not doing it to cover everything. I'm doing it kind of sporadically and kind of thoughtfully, but mostly sporadically. And I'm leaving some of that lighter shade visible. That's creating those kind of like streaks that are visible in the photograph. I'm going to continue to do that with my dark shade. I'm going to bring some, but not too much over here to create that kind of streaky, like the gullies basically, to create that like the shadows that happen because the mountain has rocks and you know, different kind of levels and stuff. Okay. And so I'm still doing this very chunky texture, which you could take or leave if you don't like it. Just paint. I'm trying to think where I can do it. I'll just do it right here. So if I don't like that chunky texture, this brush is not ideal for not having a chunky texture, but instead of doing those big kind of gash brush strokes, I can really do softer brush strokes. And I'm not sure how well it translates on the screen, but if I wanted everything to be super blendy, I just manipulate the paint in that way so that it becomes very blended. The risk with that is that you can end up with a kind of a flat color. You just want to kind of think about, you know, peppering in a little bit more, you know, light. So if I went in here and I made everything kind of the same dark shade, I could go in with, ooh, that was a lot of paint. It was like a giant glob of paint. I could though go in with, you know, a little bit of these lighter shades and blend them in to just create a little bit more of a value change. That didn't work super well, but hopefully you get what I'm saying. I didn't like what I did, so I'm making it go away by just blending it in a lot, like so. I am starting to do the thing overworking this section, just because I wanted to show you how to blend, which is fine, but I want it to be chunky. So I'm gonna let that just sit there for a sec, and I'm gonna work over here a little bit more, and I'm gonna come back to that. I'm gonna plop in some of these little rocks. This is appears to have been a better snow year than this year. Oop, that's too light. I'm just plop in some of those. There, there, there. Bring them down here. I'm just starting to get some of that rocky texture. Okay. I want to come in. This is just, you know, you're probably having different, seeing different things in your own painting. So like, just because I say what I'm doing right now is I'm coming in with a little more white because I want it to be lighter over here, doesn't necessarily mean that you need to come in with more white. What it means is I notice something that I want to change. Like I just want this side to have a little more light to it. And so I'm adding that in. So like take what I'm saying as like a cue to look at your own painting. And it does help to kind of back up and look from a distance and think about like, oh, I think I need to add a little light over there, or I think I need to make that a little darker or change that shape. So start to just think about those things. And for this part, don't get too caught up in the being a perfectionist about it. Just kind of be loose and let it happen. So I am going to go back in now that this paint's a little drier over here. Just to add a little texture, I'm adding in some highlights. And perhaps a little more importantly, for this specific painting, or this little part of the painting anyway, I'm gonna add in some of those darks that I kind of got rid of without really wanting them to go bye-bye. So I just grabbed some pure black as you can see, very powerful. Like we're going, this is like a whole different ball game with this pure black. It is significantly darker. So I just want to be kind of like aware that it is packing a punch and making a pretty big difference. So I am working in that rock band over there, keeping those brush strokes visible, not trying to make them overly specific, because this is an impression of the mountain, not an exact replica. So I am going to use that same dark paint there. And this is someplace that if you had a smaller brush, you might theoretically potentially want to use it. I like just using the same brush, but if you had like some like little rocks and stuff, you could be switching back and forth and using a little brush to create those little details. And you'll get a different effect. You do have more control over a little brush. And if you want a tighter painting, as opposed to kind of a looser painting like what I'm doing, that little brush will let you be a little bit more detailed. Okay, but we don't want to get too deep into this section right now, because we want to be able to go back and add more details to this later. So I'm going to move on to just another section of the mountain. I'm going to go to this area where we have this big shadow. Actually, I lied. I'm going to go over to this area where it's lighter and kind of fill that in first. So I have dark paint on my brush, cleaning it, getting ready for the next section. Or if you wanted to just switch brushes and put your current brush in your water bowl, your cup, you could do that too. So same idea with my direction. My direction of this area is different. So this side I was going kind of top to bottom, left to right. This side, just because I'm right-handed, I'm going bottom to top, left to right. And I'm just going bottom to top because I physically am comfortable going left to right, but you could be starting at the top and pulling down, which actually maybe it's a better technique, because then you can be getting the ridge. So anyway, I've changed direction to match kind of what the rocks in the mountain are doing. And I am just using the plain white. And I'm not thinking too much about where that shadow is. I'm actually kind of just filling this all in. The shadow I'm going to plop on top later. Next, I am thinking about the relationship between this section of the mountain and what's going to happen with this section of the mountain. So in my photograph, and I didn't add this information in yet, you have like that patch of trees in the middle there, and kind of that like, where, you know, kind of like the valley of the mountain. Is that the right word? Like where the base of the tram is. So I'm just remembering that that's an important piece of the puzzle here, and I'm going to start to kind of like create that. So that's kind of like a blending point. Like that's where this shape meets this shape. So I'm actually kind of, you know, the shapes are merging together. They're becoming one right here. And so I'm bringing some of that paint from the right side into the left side, remembering that there is going to be a big old shadow there that's going to show up in a sec. But yeah, just like, I don't want it to be like a totally stagnant like jump from one side of the mountain to the other side when there is, you know, there is a relationship there. Okay. So I have that filled in with just kind of just plain white. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to use my medium shade of gray, kind of mixing a little bit here just to make it a teensy bit darker so it shows up. Okay. And I'm just gonna, so this section here, it has these, the rocks in it, but it's still very light. So I'm not gonna go too crazy filling in shadows, but I do want that rock shape to happen. So the rock shape is like very linear, it's straight across really. So I'm trying to make it straight across here. And I'm kind of experimenting with holding my paintbrush different ways to see what happens. And also like letting the colors be a little different. I'm letting them blend into the white and have some of them be a little lighter and some be a little darker. And I'm not being overly strategic. What I don't want to do is to place these rocks like 1, 2, 3, 4, perfectly spaced, perfectly the same size, because that won't look very natural. I'm being a little, you got to be a little random with things like rocks and trees. Otherwise they look too fake. Trees, for some reason, I always end up doing like the same exact shape and size tree, like perfectly spaced. And then I look at it, I'm like, okay, I just made like a robot computer forest. And I have to change it. So there's that. Just, okay. So yeah, those rocks are very up and down. So those brush strokes are also very up and down. Because that is what that mountain, part of the mountain's like. Okay, so I'm gonna start to fill in this little zone here with this big shadow. That shadow is also going to create the definition of where the tram base is. I don't know if that like area has like a name, actually. I never really thought about that. But yeah, so that's where that tram base is. So what I'm talking about is, you see how the shadow goes down, but then it's like a very curved flat spot. That's what I just started to paint. So I'm painting the shadow, and then I'm going to drag it up like that. So I have to do it in a way that makes sense for my painting. Your proportions, my proportions, all of our proportions are not, unless you are magic, are not going to be exactly the same as the photograph. So you probably want to just kind of think about how I'm doing it and apply it to your painting in the way that makes sense. So I'm doing it in a way that makes sense for my painting, not in the necessarily exactly the way that I am painting what I see. I'm just making it work with what I've done here, because what I have painted is similar, but not exactly the same as the picture. So we're getting to that point in the painting where you start to make decisions based on your painting and not so much on what you're looking at. Of course, you're still using what you're looking at as a reference, but you're starting to be, and you actually, this has been going on for a while. You're not starting, you have been doing this, but we're just talking about it. You're starting to, really think about your painting and not exactly the photo at this point. But you are using certain landmarks, if you're really familiar with the mountain, that are important. Like I'm thinking that, like, oh, I know, like I want to leave this here because this is like the big, I want that to be evident in the painting. But that's just me. Like, you don't necessarily need that to be evident in your painting. Okay, so I have a very dark gray, and it's getting a little overpowery. So I'm gonna go, I just cleaned my brush. I'm gonna use a lighter gray to fill it in. Okay. So since I'm guessing we're all kind of in the same section, I'm going to quit talking for a little bit and let you just kind of focus on your painting. What we'll try to accomplish maybe in the next like 5-10 minutes before I start yapping again is just to kind of figure out stuff here in this section that we've already painted. So from the shadow, like bone crusher to like the beginning of the A to Z's not challenger. Okay, so what we've painted so far, just take a little time to look at yours and kind of work on it, and I'll be quiet for a little bit. And if you have questions, holler them at me. Ooh, I'm gonna say one more thing, but not about my painting, just a tip. If you are getting a little, actually, not even if you're getting like frustrated or anything, but it's just a good thing to do, is to stop, like prop your painting up, walk away from it like 10 feet and look at it from a distance. You, at this point, probably have a bit of tunnel vision, whether or not you realize it. And looking at it from a distance will give you a new perspective. So try that in the next minute or two, just to get a fresh view. Okay, any questions or ideas or anything come up while I was not talking? Okay, I'm not sure if you were feeling ready to move to the next sections. I think time-wise though, it's a good time. So if you're not super done with this section, that's actually fine. If you're not done, you are probably at least to the point where you're really starting to go more into the details than to just have like the basic colors down or shades down. So we're going to give ourselves enough time, I think. We're going to try to actually go back, since we have details as our last item. There is going to be time to go back and work in some details. So just keep that in mind as we move on here. So the next step, so to me, this was kind of the background, or it's not, it's kind of it's kind of like I always do the sky first, but I'm never really sure, like, is the sky the background, or is it just like the background? I don't know. So this was kind of like the background slash middle ground. The next, first step of the actual landscape, but the second step, because you always want to paint the sky first. So anyway, so now we're going to the middle ground. So middle ground. So on the photograph, that's going to be the stuff that's closer to your eye, but not like right smack in the front. So I'm going to count this little section as the middle ground. I'm going to count this Challenger section as the middle ground, and we'll do those two first, but then we'll start to move into this further away layer of trees as the middle ground. Okay. So for this section, cleaning off my brush or getting a different brush depending on your preference. I have been holding true with just using the one brush because. All right, so this is a pretty simple section, mostly white. I'm picking up some white paint. It has a little blue mixed in with it. But yeah, so painting in that ridge, thinking about the connection. So to me, there's like a little bit of the highlight kind of wraps around to the black. And then same idea with the brush stroke, following the motion, not just like slapping it any which direction, but following the motion of that piece of the mountain, which is kind of just straight down, really. It is pretty flat color-wise, just to create a more of a transition, taking a little bit of a creative liberty. I'm gonna do kind of an intermediate light gray just on this edge here. I'm just doing that because I want to, just so it's not stark white. So I did a little gray there. I got down far enough that I might want to start thinking about those trees, but I'm going to use some green in those trees, and my preference is to kind of fill in more white before I start messing around with green. So I'm going to leave that and come back to it. So I'm going to move myself. I'm going to actually cover part of this up. I'm going to start working on this section. So on my picture, I really cut off almost all of this. You maybe didn't. I feel like I'm more like here than like here. So I don't have this. I don't have like the top. I'm really more like here. And so I am following kind of this blue line that I painted initially. So you maybe have more info included, like maybe you didn't cut it off in the same spot. So just do the version of this that fits with what you have, and know that mine is ends about there. Okay, so filling that in with white, kind of the same as we have been. I'm making sure to cover up this blue line I have. I don't want that to show up. That's not relevant. Like, that's not really part of the painting. Okay, so I'm painting it just white. There is a little bit more info going on here that I'm going to add in, but I'm just getting some white down first. So same idea, just painting in, trying to follow the direction of the mountain. Ooh, there was a lot of blue in there. That's okay. And it kind of does swoop down to here. So really making sure I make that blue go bye-bye, because I don't want that anymore. And I've already run out of white, so I need to get myself some more. Like, you could, if you have a big enough canvas, you could use like a whole tube of white if you wanted to. Okay. So I am making some decisions about where the mountain's going to end and the trees are going to begin. It's not critical because I can always paint trees on top of the white, but it's just something that I'm starting to have in my head, like where's the mountain going to stop being like white snow and start being greenish trees. So it's probably hard to tell, but I'll just paint a little gray so you can see kind of where I'm starting to stop painting, right around like here. Like, you can't see that either. Like, I'm stopping it around there. You don't need to paint a line to show yourself. I'm just painting it to show you. And I used gray, which kind of works because there is a shadow down there. So I'm just gonna start to pull that gray up, kind of, you know, not overthinking it, just pulling it up. Since this lower section is a bit smoother, I'm using less jagged brush strokes for that one. And then as I get more into this little zone where it is pretty jagged, I'm going to be painting that information kind of on top. So this is pretty relatively flat. There is a good, decent shadow that I don't want to neglect, but is not, I don't think is crazy important. But I am going to do a little bit of that down there. And it's kind of around there. Okay. It's a little over blended, but I'm going to go back in with a little white later and pop it a little bit more. Okay, so there's that. I'm going to do that rocky zone or tree. It's kind of trees and rocks, I guess. Since we're going into trees, let's talk about green. Okay, so green is like a notoriously difficult color to work with out of the tube, and in general, it's just out of a tube especially, it can be like just like way too green. If you look at this photo and really think about it, the greens are like hardly green. They're like barely green. They're more closer to gray, maybe even closer to brown. So green, I'm going to show you what green, the power that green has that is kind of like a bit much. So I just added this like tiny drop of green to my palette, and I'm going to paint some on, but just I want you to like think about how intense this green is. I'm going to paint over it. So I'm going to paint it. I'm just going to paint it here. So like if I went on here and I started to paint all of my trees just this like flat green, it's kind of a lot. It's like a lot of green. So I'm just blending it in so it's not thick, but so it will dry fast. But I'm going to make that go away. Just be wary of the green. So if you do have a green that is super bright, like this green, grass green by Craft Smart, very bright. If I want to get real sneaky with it, and this, I didn't include these colors in the materials, but this is just like something you could do. Okay, so when you have a color that's too crazy, you can cut that color with the opposite color. So I did not include this in the materials list because you don't really need it. But if you have something like this and you have only a crazy green to choose from, you can use something, I would say more on the orange side actually, which seems incredibly counterproductive because orange and green are opposites, and when you blend them, you get brown. But like I said, this green is kind of closer to brown than like a bright green. I also have yellow ochre, which is kind of like a brownie green. That would work too, but that would, green and yellow do blend together, so it would just kind of lighten it. But since there's the brown in there, it'll help. So just to kind of illustrate what I'm saying, I'm gonna use like a teeny smidge of the burnt sienna is what I have. It's kind of an orangey brown, and if I reached in there and I grabbed just a plain orange, I would use that too, but this is the first thing I found. So I picked that up and I'm gonna blend it in, and it's gonna create a much more neutralized green. The more orange I add, the browner it will be. So you do want to kind of experiment. So that's a bit better. It might be kind of hard to tell the difference, but it is more of a foresty kind of green and a bit more natural. I could do a little bit more. So, and these are two different brands of acrylic paint. Does not matter. Totally can mix and match with brands. If I accidentally grabbed an oil paint out of my container paint, then that might not go super well. But yeah, you can mix and match brands. That doesn't make a difference. Okay, so now I just mix the whole thing, and it's definitely a lot more brown, but it is green. Like at the end of the day, it's still green. It's a different green. So it's pretty dark. And you can see those kind of like, you know, that hint of orange in there. And keep in mind, this is, I'm just going to paint over this. But yeah, I just wanted to show you that. So green is kind of intense. I know a couple artists who are like, I'd never use green, like out of the tube. I will only make my own green out of blue and yellow, or shades of blue and yellow. So you can do that. I don't necessarily do that. You know, I just make it work by mixing greens with other stuff. So anyway, I'm gonna use, I think, what do I want to do? I have a couple greens here that I like. Oh, that's actually black. I have a Jenkins green, which I'm not super familiar with, but I like it. I just got this recently. And so that's a more neutral green color, or more natural. I also have, this is sap green. That's a fairly neutral, natural color. And then, to be fair to this Craft Smart, I will use also this grass green, and I'm gonna try to make it work with just using a little black and white, and we'll kind of see what happens. This is a little bit of an experiment. So if you have a brown or an orange or even a yellow, or like a, you know, not like a bright yellow, but like a darker yellow, like an ochre, you can use that to blend with. But I'm gonna try my hand at blending with, oh, I just, these two look really similar in the tube. I just added more green instead of black. I meant to grab more black. Okay, so let's just see what happens. So same thing, like just mix what you have and try to make it work on your end. You might have, you I'm sure have different green options than I do, but hopefully you at least have a plain, or you know, like a, just like a out of the tube green. If you're mixing green and you're like, I hate all of these greens, these colors are so far from a bright green, you could really do these trees in black and white and they would look pretty cool. They would just look super snowy. You could pepper in a little blue too. You could do it, yeah, like that. You really actually don't need the green if you're mixing it and you hate it, like just abandon it. So I grabbed that sap green. I'm gonna mix some black in. So same kind of thing as with the gray. I'm just gonna get a couple different shades, probably maybe just like 2 or 3 for the greens. And I do really, for the trees, want to be going back and forth quite a bit and using a variety. So the trick with, I think that's a little difficult about using white blending a green, is that you're gonna get kind of like a seafoam sort of situation going, more than anything else, especially if you have a super bright green and you're just purely mixing it with white. Even if you're trying to make it lighter, I would add in a little black, because the black is just going to cut that extreme color. So this is just black and white and the sap green that I had, which is a little bit more of a, you know, more of a neutral green. I'm going to try it with my super bright green, the grass green. So I'll show you seafoam, or like shamrock shake. So this is like, you don't see trees that are this color really. So if I try a little black in there, let's see what happens. It might help. Yeah, I think that helps. It's a little gray though. Maybe if I try a little more green. It's definitely difficult to work with, just this individual green. But that's not too bad. It is definitely on the gray side. But like I said, in the photo, the green is really, really neutral. So having it gray is not a big problem. Okay, let's just make a little more to work with, because I do have kind of a lot of green. So that I just picked up was the Jenkins green, which is very dark out of the tube, but it is green, it's not black. And I just picked up a little black, so now it's very dark indeed. So yeah, basically I'm just mixing a few little green shades here. I don't need a crazy variety, but I want a little darker and a little lighter. Okay, that I feel like it's too dark. And if I do want some of those warmer colors in there, and I do have an orange or like a yellow ochre, I could use a little bit of that in there too. And your greens are going to look different than mine. It's just the nature of the beast, since we are not using the same exact colors to start with. They'll be a little different, just like with the blues, they'll be a little different. Okay. So I have a couple greens there. For the trees, hopefully this is not too distracting having this hot mess that I just made down here, but let's just start to talk about the trees and start to at least fill in those top ones, and then we'll move to the foreground because there are a couple spots of white that I need to fill in before I get too far. So with the trees, what I'm going to do, this would actually be a great part of the painting to have more than one paintbrush, so you can be going back and forth. Like I said, my old art teacher used to be like, you should have like 5 paintbrushes in your hand at all times so you can just rotate. This is a good time to try that. So to do the trees, you really want to do something, a technique called dry brushing, which is when you have a little less paint on your brush, so you have that scratchy look. So it's basically the opposite of what I was saying before. When you want to have a lot of paint on your brush to make a really smooth line, if you have less paint on your brush, you can make a rough line that looks like trees or shrubs or something textured. So I'm going in and I'm holding this flat paintbrush up and down. So it's kind of like, so it makes like this kind of line instead of this kind of line. And I'm dabbing it in super jagged, and I'm letting the paint run out a bit. See how if it starts to run out a lot, it just creates a very faint mark that's very textured, and that's a really good tree texture. So I'm going in, I just used one color there. I'm actually switching brushes and grabbing a different color and doing the same exact technique, super sporadic, and it just creates a texture. If you do all the same color, you're gonna have the texture, but it's gonna be less visible. Likewise, if you're using different colors, but you're not switching brushes and you're not cleaning in between, you're gonna just overblend and end up with like basically the same color. Okay, so that's like the method I'm gonna use for the trees. And I'm gonna use that same method the whole way. So before I get too far though, I'm moving into the foreground now. I'm gonna use some white. I'm actually gonna leave this, like this is very distracting, but I'll paint over it in a sec. I'm gonna just fill in some of the white areas where there's like ski trails. I'm gonna fill them in so that they're white and I can paint the trees around them and not have to worry about painting in the ski trails after the fact. And so kind of just a rough guesstimate of where those ski trails are, since this little section's kind of going to get covered over quite a bit anyway. Okay, there's one there. There's like one over here maybe. Okay, so I just want to make sure I'm not neglecting. So I'm setting myself up for success in the future, I guess. Not forgetting or neglecting that there are some spots of white to still keep in mind. That kind of does it. Okay, so I'm gonna stop. This is gonna drive me crazy. I'm just gonna fix this super quick and paint this over because that's just awful, an awful thing. So you can see the difference though, if I'm just painting like straight up and not using that dry brush texture technique, I end up with a very, very solid cover of paint, which doesn't look like trees. So what I can do to make that look more tree-like now is I can just go in and do that dry brushing technique and just fill in that space. The trees that are closer to the front, they are a little bigger. So I recommend starting at the top of a section of trees. So this kind of is all full of trees, this whole little section. If you start at the top and you work your way down. I'm going to use a slightly lighter green so you can see the difference here. And you work the way down, your way down gradually. You just can make these ones on the bottom a little, like the brush strokes a little bigger, and that will give you more of a tree look like that. Those are a little weird. I don't love those, but just to show you the point, making it a little bigger. And if I don't love them, I can just kind of keep working on them like so. But anyway, let's work our way around. You can be jumping around now that like you're going to use that same technique for all of the trees. I'm going to go back to the Challenger area and pop in some of those trees on the hill there. If you are getting real technical with it, painting strategy wise, objects that are further away are actually lighter than objects that are closer. That's just part of perspective. Like if you ever look out into like a mountain range, the furthest away mountains are actually lighter. So you could, if you were being really thoughtful, you could make your trees lighter as they're further away. One way to accomplish that is to just use lighter paint, lighter shade. Another way to accomplish that is to let your paint really start to run out. I'm letting this paint really run out. And then I know there's trees up in here, and I can just add a little bit of that green just to kind of show that those are trees, and to use a little, yeah, it's kind of nice to have colors show up more than just one area. So yeah, so further away something is, the lighter it is typically. You know, you might have an unusual lighting situation that makes that not true, but typically that's true. Another thing I could do is I could do the same technique with a gray or even a brown to create rocks. So I know there's rocks in there too. I'm trying to think where else there would be. Yeah, if you wanted your rocks in like the rocky areas of the mountain to have a bit more brown to them, you could do the same thing with brown, and you'll get that scratchy look. Okay, so anyway, I'm gonna cruise through, and I will stop talking a little bit and let you guys focus on getting your trees in. We have about 15 minutes or so till we'll kind of wrap up, and then we'll talk. But if you're like not going to be totally finished getting your trees in, obviously don't rush just to finish them, because you can always do it on your own. So I said I wasn't going to talk, but I have one more thing to say. So I think I mentioned before with maybe some rocks, be like really sporadic with your trees. Try not to make them all exactly the same, and try not to space them all exactly the same. If you do space them the same and they're like carbon copy replica, it just looks really fake. You actually want them to be very irregular, like skip spots, leave spots blank, make a couple big trees, make a couple trees that you can barely see. Don't make them all exactly the same. It's easy. For some reason, I always do it. I always make them the same, and then I have to go back and fix them. I don't know why, but just something to keep in mind. I am just going in with just one color to start with, and then I'm going to go back and add color on top, different color on top, to create some variety. And I have basically completely stopped thinking, and I am just painting. So if you also have stopped thinking, that is okay. Maybe that's a good thing. Oops. Okay, so I have on mine kind of like that same exact green all the way across now, and I just slapped it on real quick. You could be going slower if you wanted. Um, I'm going in with that second paintbrush. Ooh, got a lot of paint on that brush. And just adding a slightly different color green on top to break things up and give it more texture. And the trees that are closest to the bottom of the page are bigger, so the brush strokes are bigger. Ooh, sticking true with the concept that the objects that are closer to you are darker, I'm using a little bit of the darkest shade of green that I have. Um, or if I have already used a lot of that darkest shade, I could just mix a little black in, and I'm adding some darker shade greens to the really just like the bottom of the page to show that that's the closest part, which obviously your brain will read it as the closest part, but it will visually make a lot more sense if there is um, something to show that that's the closest part. So since we're getting low on time and it's like 10 minutes until we're kind of done, and then I kind of want to like just chat a sec, but this would be the point where you're kind of done-ish, but it's probably the point where you are thinking about looking at your painting from a distance, so standing up, walking 10 feet away or whatever, and looking for areas to adjust a little or to add details. So on my list of things to do, details come last. This painting, it doesn't have like something super detailed like a skier or something in it, or like an airplane flying overhead. But if you want to go back at kind of this point, now is a super good time to add little details. So that could be anything. In this case, it would probably be something kind of more like adding in more rocks, maybe adding in some highlights. And now that this paint most likely in this top section is dry, it's a good time to go back and actually do that in a like a physical sense. Like you can accomplish details because the underneath paint is more dry. When that underneath paint is super wet, it's good for blending. It's not great for fine detail stuff. So just keep that in mind. Like you've done foreground, middle ground, background in the opposite order of what I just said. And now a good thing to do is details. So just adding in highlights, rocks, shadows, little things, just little things that are easier done when the paint is not as wet underneath. So whether or not you're finishing trees or working on trees or popping in some more details, that's a good place to be. And if you're not even there yet, that's also a good place to be because we are different. You should be working at your own pace, not my pace. Also, now is a good time to, if you have any like little issues or mistakes that you don't like, now that the paint is probably dry, you can paint them and fix them. Oh, a detail you could add, a specific detail is the tram. If you wanted to paint a little gray or black square up on the top of the mountain, you could do that. Kind of hard to see in the picture, but this is not a good paintbrush to do it probably. You could add a little tram. That, for example, would be a detail that you would definitely want the other paint around it to be really dry, or else you'll just have a blob, like a blended in blobby blob. The more details you want to do, or like, this is the part of the painting that, like, if you get deep enough into it, you could almost kind of repaint everything. I'm not suggesting that you do that because that might be counterproductive, but depending on how detailed you wanted to be, you really could spend some, that was a bit much what I just did. You really could spend some significant time at this point, like just kind of editing what you have. I totally just did something I didn't like, but that's okay. That's an example of overworking. I should have just left that alone, but I didn't, and now I need to mess around with it to get it back to normal. That's okay though. Have a little grace and just roll with it and not overthink. But there could be worse things to overthink than painting. Could be thinking about less fun stuff. All right. Well, we're kind of like 5 minutes away from 8 o'clock, which is kind of stopping time. Say thank you to everyone for joining. And if there's anyone, I'd love to see your paintings. If anyone would like to show me, do show and tell. Here, let me flippity floppy my screen here. All right, Vince, let's see. Oh, nice. Oh, it's awesome. I don't know. Are you saying anything? Because you're muted.
There, so I have a long way to go. I decided to put Alpenglow on the peak.
Yeah, I love that.
The trees really suck. I really got to work at those. So, just ran out of time.
I mean, the shape is good. I think you probably just want to think about the colors, you know? I think you have that thing where the color is tricky, so maybe just blend a couple different colors and keep trying until you get the right one. And the thing that's nice
Yeah.
with acrylic is if you hate it, just let it dry all the way and paint it over with white and start over.
Right.
Oh,
I
it's
know.
awesome though.
I've only done watercolor, so this was a
Yeah.
new experience.
Oh, good. I hope you liked
Kind
it.
of fun.
Yeah. The Alpenglow is cool too. I think for the sake of time is why I kept it so neutral, just because that it's a whole other element with the really different color. But good job. I love it. It looks really great. Anyone else want to share? Oh, here, wait. Let me.
Oh, that's nice.
Oh, that is nice. Can you say something so you show up bigger on my screen? I don't know how to control that.
Yeah, sure.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that's awesome. Sweet. That looks really good. Nice work. Is yours on acrylic paper too, like mine?
Yeah.
Cool.
Look of it.
Nice. That looks like a framer. I think when you're all done, you should put it in a frame, probably. Yeah, that's awesome. Good job. Anyone else want to share before we head out? Cool. Well, if you are so inclined and you want to snap a photo and email it to me when you're done, I would love to see them. It's just kind of fun. It's really weird teaching and not seeing what people are doing. It like really changes the teaching game because usually it's like very like I'm looking at what you're doing, helping. So it's nice to see what you've done if you want to share it with me. Cool. So yeah, that's it. Thanks for coming, and I hope you had a good time. And we'll be doing more. Probably not virtual lessons for a little bit for now, but we do have some stuff lined up for like the spring and the summer. So keep in touch with the Arts Council for more goings-ons. All right.
Good luck with your new child.
Yeah, thank you. That's why there won't be much going on on my end for a little bit, but later there will be. All right. Thank you. I'm going to end.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thanks.